Shortly after the attacks of October 7th, we quickly realized that there were two battles being fought: a military conflict in the Middle East and one all over the world, in the media, in our universities, the battle for hearts and minds, as we called it. It soon became clear that one battle would end, albeit 2 years too late, as we just saw the last of the hostages returned from Hamas captivity. But the other would continue for years, if not decades, to come. And here we are. We are at war. Not just a war on the ground, not just a war in the skies, but a war online and in the media, a war over truth itself. For years, we talked about terrorism and Iran's regime, about Hamas, about China, about Russia, about radicalism spreading across the Middle East and onto our streets. But today, I want to focus on the front line that touches each and every one of us every single day, whether we like it or not. It is the battle fought through our screens and our news feeds, our podcasts, our classrooms, and even comes into our living rooms. This is our battlefield. Traditionally, our enemies had to cross borders and smuggle weapons, infiltrate spy networks. Today, all they need is Wi-Fi. Iran's regime, Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, Beijing's propaganda machine, they all understood something very well before many of us did. You don't have to win the war if you can win the narrative about the war. If you can convince an entire generation that their own country is evil, that Israel is the villain, that the West is guilty and deserving of punishment, you never have to fire a single shot. And so they have strategically invested millions in influence networks, experts on TV, professors on campuses, bots on social media, nonprofits with nice, cozy names, human rights groups that somehow always land on the side of the terrorists and never on the side of their victims. And where do they run their campaigns? On the big legacy networks that still pretend to be neutral, that still pretend to be in search of transparency. On social media platforms where anonymous accounts push their propaganda. On college campuses where radical professors preach jihad and call it justice. On TikTok, where anti-West, anti-Israel, pro-extremist narratives are reaching and penetrating 14-year-old minds faster than any history book. This is soft power, strategic and by design. At this very moment, President Trump is facing a decision that will shape foreign policy for decades to come. Does America make a deal with Iran's regime, or does America stand firm and confront it militarily and economically in hopes of catalyzing the most consequential regime change of our time? The regime knows that it can't defeat the United States head-on, so it's doing what it has done since 1979, waging psychological warfare. It funds proxies, it funds narratives, it pays lobbyists, it plants Iran experts on our TV screens. It backs campus protests that appear to be organic, but can be traced back to money wired from Tehran. So while our president is crunching intelligence reports and military assessments, the Iran regime is working double time, pushing bots and hashtags, op-eds, think tank papers, and carefully crafted talking points into the bloodstream of American politics, trying to box us in, trying to shame us into appeasement, trying to turn public opinion here into its own voice and ally, and ultimately a weapon against American interests. When we talk about whether or not to make a deal with Tehran, we're not just fighting over sanctions and centrifuges. We're fighting over the narrative. Is it the Islamic Republic as a misunderstood partner, as they've convinced a segment of our media and college professors and voters who are actually defending them? Versus what we know to be true, the original Islamic State that's been funding terror and brutally killing at home and abroad, and destabilizing the region for nearly half a century. So when people are fearful of going to war against Iran's regime, remind them that this is a battle we've already been dragged into for years. The question many have is, how did we, the West, lose the narrative? After October 7th, the world watched the deadliest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Babies murdered with bare hands, women raped, families burned alive, grandparents dragged into tunnels. And yet, within weeks, the story flipped. Suddenly, Israel, the country that was attacked, became the aggressor. Suddenly, the terrorists became resistant. Suddenly, the words genocide and apartheid were sprayed on American campuses, shouted in the halls of Congress, and casually repeated on major news outlets as faithfully established facts. How did this happen? Well, it happens when legacy media outlets hire stringers and fixers who are literally embedded with terror groups and call it reporting. It happens when journalists quote casualty numbers coming directly from Hamas as if they're neutral public health data. Coincidentally, these same journalists now have a hard time reporting on the Iran protests because they can't verify the numbers. It happens when editors choose images of rubble, often photoshopped and created by AI, over images of beheaded babies. Why? Because one fits their narrative and the other one undoes it. It happens when universities invite speakers who openly glorify October 7th. But this didn't start on October 7th. I've given dozens of talks as somebody who was a Middle Eastern studies major as an undergrad, then went to get my master's in journalism. I went undercover 20 years ago on major college campuses where the seeds of what we are seeing today had already been planted. I've said it many times, I feel as though I have had a front row seat at the jihadification of America. And I can tell you, what we are watching unfold in our most trusted and established institutions didn't happen overnight and didn't happen as a result of October 7th. The groundwork has been laid for decades in Middle Eastern studies departments, in journalism schools, in think tanks that normalized dialogue with Islamists and treated them as legitimate political actors instead of the extremists that they are. These are the consequences of the narrative warfare we have ignored for years. The thing is, when you lose on the battlefield, you lose territory. When you lose the information war, you lose reality. You get young Americans who can't point to Israel or Gaza on a map, but all of a sudden chant from the river to the sea as though it's their generation's freedom song. You get Jewish students hiding in the libraries of elite universities as if this is 1930s Europe, not 2020s America. You get politicians who are more afraid of the cancel mob than they are of terror organizations infiltrating us here on US soil. And meanwhile, our enemies, they're watching and they're taking notes. What's the message to them? Well, if you can turn the American public opinion against Israel, you can turn it against America itself. If they can convince the next generation that our founding values are oppressive, then they can convince them that our enemies are actually the liberators. So this isn't just about Israel. This is about whether the free world believes in our own right to exist. And did you notice? As they burned Israeli flags on our streets during the pro-Hamas protests, what came next? The burning of American flags, that's right. And the two always go hand in hand. So what does the battle online and on air mean for us in media and policy, activism, and in our own communities? How can we reclaim the narrative and demand fair coverage and inform the masses going forward? What can we do when we face the stark realization that we are outnumbered, outfunded, and unfortunately, outmaneuvered? First, we may be outnumbered, but we need to continue growing our base. Just look around this room. Jews and Christians, pastors and rabbis, journalists, activists, students, parents. It's not just a conference. This is the Situation Room. The fact that we are here together, a Judeo-Christian Zionist gathering in Nashville, already defies their narrative that says the West is crumbling and Israel stands alone. We were never meant to fight this war alone or behind our phones. Our enemies, they're building networks, they're funding ecosystems, they're training messengers. We have to do the same. That means find your people, online and offline, who see what you see and refuse to surrender to these lies. Turn a room like this into a living network with text threads and email lists and content teams and rapid response groups. When the next blood libel against Israel starts trending, we'll be ready. We'll know who's cutting the clip and who's posting the thread, who's writing the op-ed, who's going on the next podcast that night. Second, we become serious, disciplined media warriors. Every one of us in this room has a platform, whether we like it or not. Your X account, your TikTok, your podcast, your church newsletter, that's your little newsroom. Treat it like one. But be selective. Don't share anonymous accounts. If you don't know, don't trust. And slow down. Ask who's behind this? Who will benefit if I share this? Third, we stop playing only defense. They lie, we fact check. They lie, we fact check. This is not the right strategy. We need to go on offense with the truth. Tell the stories that never make it to prime time. The Israeli medic who is treating a Palestinian child. The Iranian woman who says, not Palestine, not Lebanon, I only give my life for Iran. The Jewish kid on the American campus who refuses to hide, who refuses to take off his Star of David. Make things that are short, sharp, visual, human, emotional. Clips and reels and essays and sermons that explain not only what October 7th was, but what Iran's regime really is and what from the river to the sea really means. Fourth, let's bring our faith into this openly. The other side isn't just defending extremist Islamism, they have created an entirely new, dominating and spreading ideology. They're blasting it all over media and social media, and guess what? They're not shy about it. So why are we? Become the ambassador. Support the voices who actually know what they're talking about and the platforms that work independently to share the truth. And something that must be said, not all influencers are created equal. If we are to support and amplify voices, let's be discerning. Fifth, turn outrage into organized pressure. Narratives shape our policy, and that policy is responsible for whether people get killed or whether people are protected. So, when your local paper runs a piece that reads like it was written by the Iran regime, don't just yell at the TV, write to the editor, demand a correction, cancel your subscription if you have to. Show up at school board meetings when textbooks lie about Israel. Call your representatives when they repeat anti-Semitic talking points. Tell your child's university or your own alma mater that you refuse to write the next check. The bottom line is, clicks, dollars, and votes are the only language that every institution will understand. And finally, despair is not an option. It's actually what they're hoping for. Yes, they are better funded, better organized, and are backed by an army of bots. But we have what they don't. A story that's actually true, a civilization that's actually worth defending, and a God who continues to protect us. So here's my challenge as we walk out of this room. Don't go home and say, well, that was an interesting panel on the media. Go home as though you've been drafted. Find your allies, build your channels, train your kids, back the people on the front lines. Tell the truth, tell it early, tell it clearly, tell it creatively, tell it courageously. Because the question is no longer, is there a war over the narrative? The question is, what are we going to do to show up and fight it? And my hope, my prayer, is that years from now, when our kids and grandkids ask us what we did when the battle moved online and on air, we'll be able to say, we didn't sit this one out. We did what we could to protect Israel, to protect America. We stood together, Jews, Christians, and our friends, shoulder to shoulder. We fought with our words, with our courage, and with our convictions. And by the grace of God, we helped pull the story back toward the truth. Thank you.